Well, good morning. And for those of you who have persisted and waited, thank you for waiting. I apologize for the delays that there have been in getting back to this. I'm sorry that it's taken so long to get myself organized after a holiday. So last week was just about doing that. And also just thinking about, do we need these things anymore? The situation's changing. But we will persist with them. We'll go on a little as we go through Ephesians. We should find some encouragement in Paul's words to help us in our current situation. Now, if you remember where we left it 3 weeks ago now, we left it at Ephesians 2 verse 18. Actually, if you don't remember, you can go back to the church's page, Salve Evangelical Church, and there's a video tab, and it's got all the videos under there. So we left it, chapter 2 verse 18, which was Paul talking about the access we have to God through the Lord Jesus and the way he welcomes us in. Well, the verses that follow are a consequence of that. Let me read just one verse, chapter 2, verse 19. It says, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household." There's more to it than that, but we'll pause at that point. What Paul is reminding us is that we are now connected to what we call church. And sometimes we feel a bit half-hearted about that. We like the idea of God welcoming us in, but we're not always so keen that God has brought us into a group of people that we're going to travel with. There was a joke in the 1980s when I was a young Christian, and it aimed at a particular denomination, but you could apply it to many. But the particular one was St. Peter is showing people around heaven, and they have to go past a high wall. And he says, "Shh, you need to be quiet." And people say, "Why? Why?" Well, that's the charismatics in there, and they think they're the only ones up here. You could apply that to a lot of denominations. But however, Paul says God brings you into a family, a wide family of people of all sorts brought in. So that you are no longer foreigners. And of course, the context of that statement is that previously he said that's exactly what we were. We were foreigners to all God's promises. And that's in chapter 2, verse 12. Excluded from all the blessings in the covenant. And now, however, we're not. And God's brought you near. He's brought you into his household. It's a lovely description of the extended family, not just mum and dad and 2 kids, but all sorts of people within this wide family. We're not foreigners, we're not aliens, we're in God's household. Actually, you might be aware that Peter, in his first letter in chapter 2, says that we are foreigners and aliens. We are strangers, but he's talking about something different. He's talking about our relationship to the world. That if you belong to Jesus, you don't belong to the world, and therefore you are, in a very real sense, an alien within the world. You don't belong. You're heading somewhere else. Paul, however, is thinking about our relationship to God and to each other. We're not foreigners to each other. We're not aliens to one another because we've been brought to be members of God's people. We're not like refugees in the world who have nobody. We have each other. And it's this community that shows God's acceptance to the world, God's love and God's grace. We have access to the Father, and by the way in which we welcome one another, we show his love for the world, where outsiders are brought in and strangers are welcomed and aliens are embraced. Maybe you've experienced that. You've gone to a church perhaps in another country and found that for all the different customs, you do feel at home with them. Now, last week saw the 72nd anniversary of the arrival of the ship Empire Windrush, bringing workers from Jamaica to help in the reconstruction of Britain after the Second World War. Now, their struggles are well documented, their tragic struggles of trying to find acceptance, and of course their struggles are still going on. But what is not often mentioned is the way that its churches participated in that lack of welcome. Many Jamaicans were devout believers and were quite shocked to discover how non-devout Britain was even then. But they went to church because that's what they knew was right and good to do, but found that in many cases they were simply turned away. They were not welcomed. They were told to go worship elsewhere. And so that's why many black majority churches were in fact founded. Now, we shouldn't be smug telling that story and saying, well, of course, there are no problems in churches today. That problem is still around, and we do need to deal with it. But the model that God gives us here simply won't allow it. When God wanted to show the world his love and acceptance, he created, well, what did he create? Not some elite superforce of superheroes or some fantastic army with all the modern weapons. He created a family. And we know that families have all their troubles and all their problems. But that's what he did. And if you belong to Jesus, you belong to that family. So the question is not what can this family do for me? That's not the first question you should be asking. The question is, what can I do for this family? What am I going to do to support this family, to ensure that others feel that they are not aliens? Well, I'll leave you with that question, and I'll see you tomorrow with more.